The first breath of dawn over the city always smelled of wet pavement and possibility. For Maya Hassan, it also smelled of cumin. Long before the sun climbed high enough to bake the asphalt of the food truck lot, Mina, as everyone called her, was already at war with a mountain of dough. Her hands, dusted in a fine white powder, moved with a muscle memory that spanned 3 generations. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. This was her inheritance, not in deeds or stocks, but in the precise, practiced motions that transformed flour, water, and ghee into the impossibly thin, pliable sheets for her grandmother's samosas. Her food truck, the Rolling Samosa, was a vibrant splash of saffron yellow against the gray cityscape. Hand-painted paisleys coiled around the serving window, and the scent that billowed from its roof vent was Mina's secret weapon, a siren song of toasted spices and sizzling onions that could halt a hurried stockbroker in their tracks. It was a small kingdom, but it was hers. From the worn smooth handle of her grandmother's rolling pin to the temperamental hum of the generator, she knew its every secret. The lunch rush was a controlled symphony of chaos. 2 lamb, 1 veggie, extra chutney, she'd call out to herself, her hands a blur as she plucked golden triangles from the bubbling oil, the crispy shells blistering and puffing to perfection. She knew her regulars by their orders. Oh, Mr. Henderson, the corporate lawyer, always wanted his samosas, as spicy as you can make Mina, make me regret it tomorrow. The trio of nurses from the nearby clinic shared a dozen veggie samosas, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the sizzle of the fryer. Mina served not just food, but stories. My nanny used to say the secret wasn't in the spices, but in the anger, she'd tell a new customer, demonstrating the sharp, decisive crimp she used to seal the pastry. You have to seal it like you're sealing away a secret tight and forever. People loved it. They ate up the history as eagerly as they devoured the food. And then there was the quiet woman. Every Thursday, like clockwork at precisely 11:45 a.m. before the main rush, she would appear. She was always impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and sensible heels, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She never made eye contact, never said more than, "A dozen of the lamb, please." She paid in crisp $20 bills and would stand patiently to the side, scrolling through her phone until her order was ready. She'd take the white paper bag, murmur a clipped thank you, and disappear back into the anonymous flow of the city. Mina, ever curious, had nicknamed her the woman in gray. She found the ritual bizarre. Who bought a dozen hot samosas in the middle of a workday every single week? A secret office party? A very specific, very consistent craving? Mina had installed a small, wide-angle security camera above the cash box a year ago, more for peace of mind than anything else. It blinked its tiny red light, faithfully recording every transaction, including the 52 identical ones with the woman in gray. Despite the steady business and the love from her regulars, a quiet hum of discontent often settled over Mina in the quiet moments after the rush. She would scroll through food blogs, her thumb hovering over glossy photos of Michelin-starred plates, foams, gels, and deconstructed dishes that looked more like science experiments than meals. She saw the celebrity chefs, the gleaming empires they built on television smiles and branding. Was this it for her, a 12-foot metal box on the corner of 5th and Elm? She was proud of her grandmother's legacy, fiercely so, but a small, traitorous voice whispered in her ear, wondering if she was meant for something more, something bigger than this small, mobile kingdom. She just never imagined that the bigger world was already on its way to her, 1 dozen samosas at a time. Julian Croft existed in a different universe, one made of flattering studio lights and artfully smudged charcoal on pristine white plates. He wasn't just a chef, he was a brand. His show, Croft's Cuisine, was a masterclass in culinary theater. He never just cooked, he curated experiences and painted with flavor. His signature move was a pensive gaze into the middle distance as he described how a simple ingredient, a tomato, a sprig of thyme, had spoken to him on a recent journey to a rustic, unspoiled corner of the world. The modern palate, he declared to a fawning talk show host, is a global palate. We're no longer bound by borders. His smile was a perfectly calibrated instrument, designed to convey both artistic genius and down-to-earth approachability. My new restaurant, Ember, is the culmination of that philosophy. We're taking humble, authentic flavors from the street and elevating them. Watching the segment from his cramped apartment, his laptop balanced on a stack of cookbooks, was Alex Chen. Alex ran a blog called The Street Plate, a gritty, honest love letter to the city's unheralded culinary heroes. He knew the people who actually cooked on the streets Croft romanticized, and he knew their struggle. He viewed chefs like Julian Croft with a deep, abiding skepticism. He'd heard the whispers for years. Croft's inspirations were often a little too close to the dishes served in small, immigrant-run restaurants in Queens or the Bronx, places Croft would never publicly acknowledge. Elevating them, Alex muttered to his screen. He means stealing them and charging $50 a plate. Miles away, in a stainless steel test kitchen that looked more like a laboratory, the real Julian Croft was far from the serene artist he played on TV. No, 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 he snapped, pushing a plate away with a flick of his wrist. The texture is all wrong. Oh, it's heavy. It's clumsy. His team of young, terrified-looking chefs flinched. Before them was a tray of misshapen, pale triangles, their latest attempt to replicate the prize. Just then the door opened and Croft's assistant, a woman in a tailored gray blazer, entered carrying a simple white paper bag. The air in the kitchen shifted. Finally, Croft said, snatching the bag. The aroma of cumin and fried pastry filled the sterile air. He took out one of Mina's perfect, golden brown samosas, held it up to the light, and then took a bite. His eyes closed for a moment, not in ecstasy, but in sharp, analytical concentration. This, he said, his mouth still full, gesturing with the half-eaten samosa at his team. This is what it's supposed to taste like. The shell shatters. It's delicate, but it's not greasy. The filling has heat, but it's complex. There are layers. He placed the remnant on a clean white plate. Figure it out, he commanded, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth he projected to millions. The restaurant opens in 2 months. I want this on the menu. But make it sexy. Give it a stupid name. Something French-sounding. And for God's sake, get the story straight. I discovered this in a remote mountain village in the Himalayas. Got it? His team nodded numbly, their eyes fixed on the half-eaten samosa sitting on the plate. A foreign object, a puzzle, a threat. It was a piece of Mina Hassan's heart, and they were about to dissect it. The exhaustion of a 14-hour day had settled deep into Mina's bones. After scrubbing the last of the grease from the fryer and locking up the rolling samosa, she was finally home, collapsed on her worn floral sofa. The apartment was small, but it was filled with the ghosts of her family's love. Her grandmother's spice rack on the wall, her father's worn armchair in the corner. It was her sanctuary. Mindlessly, she scrolled through her social media feed, a cascade of cat videos and friends' vacation photos. Then a post from a major food publication stopped her thumb mid-flick. The headline read, "First look, Julian Croft unveils signature dish for highly anticipated restaurant Ember." Curiosity piqued, she clicked the link. A video clip loaded. It was from a national morning show, the set offensively bright and cheerful. The host was beaming at Julian Croft, who stood beside a gleaming silver cloche. "So Julian," the host gushed, "we are all on the edge of our seats. Your new restaurant Ember is the talk of the town. And you've promised us the world premiere of your signature dish." Croft gave his practiced, humble genius smile. "Well, I wanted to create something that spoke to my travels, to my philosophy of finding the soul of a place in its food. On a recent trip to a tiny, forgotten village in the foothills of the Himalayas, I was welcomed into a family's home, and they shared with me their most treasured recipe, a savory pastry passed down for generations." With a flourish, he lifted the cloche. Mina's breath caught in her throat. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the floor. There, on a ridiculously large white plate, garnished with a single absurd micro-cilantro leaf, sat her grandmother's samosa. It wasn't just similar. It was identical. The shape was perfect, a crisp triangle with the same slight puffiness in the center. She could see the specific three-point crimp along the sealed edge, the one her nanny had called the secret keeper's seal. Even the color, a deep, uniform gold, was hers. "I call it the Ember Puff," Croft announced grandly. A delicate hand-rolled pastry filled with spiced lamb and vegetables. It's a taste of authenticity elevated for the modern palate. The world around Mina went silent. The cheerful chatter from the television faded into a dull roar in her ears. A cold, creeping numbness spread through her limbs, followed by a wave of heat so intense it made her dizzy. It was a violation. He hadn't just copied a dish, he had stolen her story, hollowed it out, and wore it like a costume. The Himalayas, a forgotten village, her grandmother had perfected that recipe in her tiny apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens, after years of trial and error. She snatched her phone from the floor, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock it. As she replayed the clip, again and again. Each viewing was a fresh stab of betrayal. The way he held it, the way he described the delicate pastry, it was all a performance, a lie built on her family's legacy. Her first call was to Zara, her family friend and fellow food trucker who ran a kebab truck 2 blocks down. Z, turn on your TV. Channel 7, Mina, what's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost. Worse, Mina whispered, her eyes locked on Julian Croft's smiling face. I'm watching a thief. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Zara's sharp intake of breath. Oh, Mina. No, but it was too late. The ghost was out and it was wearing her grandmother's clothes. The numbness was receding, replaced by a slow-burning, white-hot rage. He had picked the wrong food truck, the wrong family, the wrong woman. He had forgotten one crucial detail about her grandmother's recipe. The secret ingredient wasn't anger. It was fight. The rage that had ignited in Mina's living room carried her through the next 48 hours. It propelled her through sleepless nights and frantic online searches. The name she landed on was Ben Carter, attorney at law. His website was simple, his office address was in a less than glamorous part of town, but his bio had a spark of defiance that resonated with her. He specialized in creative and intellectual property law for the little guy. Ben's office was a testament to that mission statement. It was a cramped, cluttered space, where towers of legal books leaned at precarious angles and the air smelled of stale coffee and determination. Ben himself was younger than she'd expected, with a shock of unruly hair and eyes that lit up with genuine interest as Mina unspooled her story. She laid it all out, her grandmother's recipe book, photos of the food truck, her own detailed notes on the process. Ben listened intently, nodding, his expression growing more serious with each detail. It's a tough case, Mina, he said finally, leaning back in his creaking chair. Legally, you can't copyright a list of ingredients. A recipe isn't considered intellectual property in the same way a book or a song is. His lawyers will argue he was simply inspired. Mina's heart sank. The fire in her belly flickered. So that's it, he just gets away with it. I didn't say that, Ben said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You said he didn't just take the ingredients. He took the whole thing. The method, the shape, the story. He leaned forward. And you have more, don't you? This was the moment. Mina took a deep breath. His assistant. Or someone who works for him. She's been coming to my truck every Thursday for the last year. She buys a dozen lamb samosas. Every single week. Same time, same order. Ben's eyebrows shot up. You're sure it's his assistant? I'm not sure of anything, Mina admitted. But the timing, it's too much of a coincidence. He starts developing his restaurant, and a well-dressed woman starts buying my signature dish every week like she's collecting samples. She paused, then delivered the final blow. And I have it on video. A whole year of it. The cluttered office seemed to fall silent. Ben stared at her, the playful spark in his eyes replaced by a focused, predatory gleam. This was the hook. This was the case. Mina, he said, his voice low and excited, that changes everything. This isn't about copyright anymore. This is about trade secret misappropriation. Your recipe, your specific process is the secret. And we can prove he used improper means, deception, to acquire it. The videos show a pattern. A conspiracy, fueled by a fresh surge of hope. They drafted a cease and desist letter. It was a powerful, eloquent document, laying out their claim and demanding that Croft immediately remove the Ember Puff from his menu and all promotional materials. They sent it via courier to Croft's corporate headquarters. The response was faster and more brutal than either of them had anticipated. It came not from Croft, but from a law firm with a name that sounded like a weapon, a thick, cream-colored envelope containing a 2-page letter. The language was cold and dismissive. It referred to Mina's claim as baseless, frivolous, and demonstrably false. It accused her of attempting to extort a celebrated culinary artist and concluded with a thinly veiled threat of a countersuit for defamation that would, they promised, bankrupt her business and tarnish her name permanently. Mina read the letter, her hands trembling. The corporate bullying, the sheer arrogance of it, was designed to make her feel small, to make her crawl back into her saffron yellow truck and stay there. Zara's warnings about Croft's power echoed in her ears. For a fleeting moment, she considered it. The smart thing to do was to walk away. Then she looked up at the wall of Ben's office, at the framed posters of famous legal battles, of Davids who had faced their Goliaths. She thought of her grandmother who had come to this country with nothing and built a life out of flour and spices and sheer, unyielding will. She had never backed down from a fight in her life. Mina placed the threatening letter flat on Ben's desk, her hand smoothing the expensive paper. She looked him straight in the eye, the fire in her own now burning brighter than ever. "File the lawsuit," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's see how they like a fight." She had just stepped off a cliff with no idea if she would fly or fall. But there was no going back. The point of no return had been crossed. The moment the lawsuit was filed, it was like dropping a match into a tinderbox. The story was irresistible: the small, independent food truck owner versus the celebrity chef. David versus Goliath with a side of chutney. Alex Chen was the first to give the story the weight it deserved. His blog post, titled "The Samosa and the Celebrity: A Tale of Two Kitchens," went live less than 24 hours after the suit was filed. He didn't just report the facts, he wove a narrative. He contrasted the sterile, corporate language of Croft's press releases with the vibrant, lived-in reality of Mina's food truck. He interviewed her regulars who spoke of her with fierce loyalty. He wrote about the concept of culinary heritage and the fine line between appreciation and appropriation. The post was shared thousands of times, and Alex's blog, The Street Plate, suddenly had a national audience. But for every reader who championed Mina, there seemed to be two who attacked her. Croft's PR machine, a well-oiled engine of spin and damage control, roared to life. They didn't engage with the facts of the case. Instead, they attacked the source. Anonymous insiders were quoted in gossip columns, painting Mina as a disgruntled former wannabe chef who had once tried to get a job in one of Croft's kitchens and been rejected. It was a complete fabrication, but it was plausible enough to plant a seed of doubt. The trolls descended upon her social media pages like a biblical plague. They called her a gold digger, a liar, a fame whore. Her food truck's online review pages were carpet-bombed with one-star ratings from people who had clearly never been there. "Food was cold," one wrote. "Found a hair in my samosa," claimed another. In the space of a week, her 5-star rating plummeted to a 2.5. The digital assault had a real-world impact. The lunch lines, once a reliable snake of hungry customers, grew short. Some regulars still came, offering quiet words of support, but many were scared off. The corporate lunch crowd, wary of being associated with any kind of controversy, vanished completely. Mina would stand in her truck during what should have been the busiest hour of the day, the oil in her fryer staying tragically clean, the silence broken only by the hum of the generator and the ping of another hateful comment appearing on her phone. The financial pressure was immense. The legal fees were mounting, and her income had been slashed in half. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into the cracks of her resolve. At night she'd lie awake, the threatening words from Croft's lawyers echoing in her head. Bankrupt her business and tarnish her name permanently. They were succeeding. One afternoon, Zara appeared at the serving window, her face etched with concern. She didn't say "I told you so," but it hung in the air between them. Instead, she pushed a crumpled envelope through the window. "It's not much," she said gruffly. "A little something from me and some of the other truckers." To help with things, Mina opened it. Inside was a wad of cash, a few $100s. It was a fortune for people who operated on razor-thin margins. Tears welled in Mina's eyes, blurring the sight of her friend's stern, worried face. "You don't have to do this, Z." "Yes, I do," Zara insisted. "That bastard thinks he can crush us, the little people. He thinks we'll just roll over." Her eyes flashed with an anger that mirrored Mina's own. "You have to win this, Mina." For all of us, the quiet act of solidarity was a lifeline. It wasn't just her fight anymore. She was fighting for every street vendor, every family-run diner, every person whose history was written in recipes. The media storm had battered her, but it hadn't broken her. The phase of the lawsuit known as discovery was a slow, grinding war of attrition. It was a world of paper, of endless documents, interrogatories, and requests for admission. Ben Carter's small office was now command central, its walls covered in timelines and org charts of Croft's vast corporate empire. "Our entire case hinges on convincing a jury that your recipe and method qualify as a trade secret," Ben explained, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in his frantic scrawl. That means we have to prove two things. First, that it has independent economic value by not being generally known, and second, that you took reasonable efforts to maintain its secrecy. Croft's legal team, a trio of sharks from the firm of Slaughter, Finch, and Glade, latched onto that second point. Their strategy was clear: to portray Mina as a careless amateur, not a professional protecting a valuable asset. The deposition was held in a soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of the city was spectacular, but it only served to make Mina feel smaller. Across the polished mahogany table sat Croft's lead counsel, a woman with silver hair and an Arctic smile named Eleanor Vance. For 6 hours, Vance grilled her. Her questions were a cascade of subtle condescension. Odemas. Hassan, you operate your business out of a vehicle, is that correct? It's a food truck, yes. And you serve customers on a public street? Yes. Did you require these customers to sign non-disclosure agreements before purchasing one of your pastries? No, Mina said, her knuckles white as she gripped her hands in her lap. Ben had prepped her for this, had warned her not to let Vance get under her skin. So anyone could purchase your product, take it home, and analyze it? A competitor, for instance? I suppose so. So you took no steps zero to protect this supposedly valuable trade secret? The full recipe wasn't for sale, Mina retorted, her voice firmer than she expected. The exact measurements, the specific order of operations, the technique for making the dough, that wasn't public. My grandmother kept it in a book. I keep it in my head. That's how we protected it. Vance just smiled, a thin, knowing smile that made Mina's blood run cold. Behind the scenes, Croft's team was burying them in paperwork. They filed motion after motion: a motion to dismiss, a motion for summary judgment, a motion to compel every scrap of financial data Mina had ever possessed. It was a classic bleed them dry tactic, designed to exhaust the resources of a smaller opponent until they were forced to surrender. Ben was a machine. He seemed to survive on caffeine and righteous indignation, working late into the night, crafting responses, and fighting them every step of the way. Mina would bring him bags of samosas and strong coffee, and they would sit in the quiet chaos of his office, the city lights twinkling below, two small figures against a mountain of legal briefs. They're trying to break you, Mina, Ben told her one night, his eyes weary but his voice steady. Don't let them. Mina watched him, saw the unwavering belief in his eyes, and felt her own resolve harden. The labyrinth was designed to make you lose your way, to make you forget why you entered in the first place. But every condescending question from Eleanor Vance, every bullying motion they filed, only reminded Mina of what was at stake. They thought she was just a cook. They were about to find out she was a fighter. Just as Mina felt she was drowning in a sea of legal documents and public scorn, a lifeline appeared from the most unexpected of quarters. Alex Chen, who had been quietly following the case since his initial blog post, had been doing some digging of his own. He started connecting dots, finding a recurring pattern in Julian Croft's career. A revolutionary barbecue technique that bore a striking resemblance to one from a family-owned joint in Austin. A unique mole sauce that was eerily similar to the one served at a beloved Abuela's restaurant in East LA. He published a follow-up piece, The Ghost in the Kitchen, suggesting the samosa incident wasn't an anomaly but part of a modus operandi. The article caught the attention of Genevieve Finch, the notoriously sharp-tongued and deeply respected food critic for the city's largest newspaper. Finch was a purist, an old-school journalist who loathed the rise of celebrity chefs and their slick branding. Intrigued, she decided to conduct an experiment. First, she made a reservation at Ember under a false name. She ordered the Ember Puff and dissected it with surgical precision. Her review, published a few days later, was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. She described the puff as a technically proficient yet soulless replica, a ghost of a dish that has had its heart removed and replaced with a price tag. The very next day, she appeared at Mina's food truck, disguised in a floppy hat and sunglasses. She ordered a single lamb samosa, stood to the side, and ate it slowly, her expression unreadable. The second half of her review was published 2 days later. It was a love letter. She praised Mina's samosa as a culinary heirloom passed through the hands of generations. She wrote of the shatteringly crisp pastry and a filling that was a symphony of spices, each note clear and distinct. She concluded, one is an overpriced echo. The other is the thing itself, and it is glorious. If you want to taste the real story, don't go to the fancy restaurant downtown. Go to the yellow truck on the corner of 5th and Elm. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. The review went viral. Suddenly, the Rolling Samosa was the hottest ticket in town. The line snaked around the block, filled with curious foodies, supportive locals, and even other chefs. Mina had to call in Zara and two of her cousins just to handle the crush. For the first time in months, she was working with a smile on her face, the sizzle of the fryer a triumphant roar. Public opinion, that fickle beast, began to swing dramatically in her favor. The victory was intoxicating. That evening, Alex came by the truck after she had closed, helping her clean up. The energy between them, which had been simmering for weeks, finally bubbled over. "You did this, you know," Mina said, her voice soft. "Your article, it changed everything." "I just wrote the truth," Alex replied, his eyes holding hers. "You're the one who's living it." In the quiet of the empty street, surrounded by the lingering scent of spices, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a beacon of light in the middle of her long, dark fight. But the light cast a long shadow. In his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Julian Croft read Genevieve Finch's review, his face a mask of cold fury. He had underestimated Maya Hassan. He had seen her as a nuisance, a nobody. Now she was a threat. "This ends now," he hissed to his legal team over the phone. "I don't care what it takes. Crush her," the game had changed. He was no longer just defending a lawsuit, he was fighting for the survival of his empire. And he was done playing nice. The counterattack, when it came, was not a frontal assault but a surgical strike, aimed with chilling precision at the very heart of their case. Croft's lawyers, having combed through every piece of discovery, found the weakness they were looking for. It was hidden in the technical specifications of the cheap, consumer-grade security camera Mina had bought online. A tiny, almost invisible bullet point in the fine print includes ambient audio recording. Mina had never known. She had bought it for the picture, a simple visual record of the cash box. She never listened to the files, she only ever watched them. But the state of New York had some of the strictest wiretapping laws in the country. It was a two-party consent state, meaning it was illegal to record a private conversation without the consent of everyone involved. The quiet, clipped transactions with the woman in gray, where she would state her order and Mina would state the price, were, in the cold eyes of the law, private conversations. And they had been recorded without consent. Eleanor Vance filed the motion immediately, to exclude all video evidence from the trial on the grounds that it was obtained illegally. Ben fought it with everything he had. He argued that the audio was incidental, that Mina had no intent to record conversations, that the primary evidence was visual. But the judge was a stern, by-the-book jurist with a reputation for being a stickler on procedural rules. The hearing was short and brutal. The judge listened to both arguments, his face impassive. Then he delivered his ruling. "The statute is clear," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The recordings contain audio and were made without the consent of both parties. The evidence is therefore inadmissible." Motion granted. The two words "motion granted" sucked the air out of the courtroom. Mina felt a physical blow, as if the judge's gavel had come down on her chest. "The videos. They're ace in the hole. They're proof. Gone. Just like that." Back in Ben's office, the dejection was a thick, suffocating blanket. The whiteboard, once a symbol of their strategy and hope, now seemed to mock them with its useless diagrams. "What do we do now?" Mina whispered, her voice hoarse. Ben stared out the window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know, Mina. Our entire case was built on that evidence. Without it, it's just your word against his. And he's Julian Croft." All the fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. The trolls, the financial strain, the sleepless nights, she had endured it all because she had the truth on a hard drive. Now the truth was irrelevant. Croft's power wasn't just in his money and fame. It was in his ability to manipulate the system, to turn the very laws designed to protect people into weapons against them. She finally snapped. The grief and rage she had been bottling up for months erupted. "I can't do this anymore, Ben," she cried, her voice cracking. "He's going to ruin me. He already has. I should have listened to everyone. I'm just a girl with a food truck. What was I thinking?" Her internal conflict, the voice that had always whispered she wasn't good enough, was now screaming. She was an imposter in this world of high-stakes litigation and corporate power. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wings made of dough and spices had just melted away. All seemed lost. Julian Croft had won. The days following the judge's ruling were the darkest yet. A settlement offer arrived from Croft's team as if on cue. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. A paltry sum that would barely cover a fraction of Ben's fees, and it was contingent on Mina signing an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, effectively silencing her forever. It was go-away money. Maybe I should take it, Mina said to Ben, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She was sitting in his office, the offer letter trembling in her hand. I can't afford a trial, not without the videos. I'll lose everything. Ben, who had been brooding for 2 days, slammed his hand down on his desk, making the towers of paper jump. No, he said, his voice a low growl. We are not taking this. This isn't a settlement. It's a gag order. It's him putting his boot on your neck and paying you for the privilege. He started pacing again, but this time the frantic energy was back, a spark rekindled in the darkness. I've been thinking about this all wrong. I was so focused on the evidence on the how he stole it. But that's not the real story, is it? The real story is the what? It's the recipe. It's your grandmother. It's the soul of the dish. He stopped and looked at her, his eyes blazing. We shift the strategy. We can't prove the theft anymore, so we'll expose the fraud. We're going to put Julian Croft on that stand, and we are going to let him hang himself with his own lies. We'll prove to that jury that he doesn't have the slightest clue what he's talking about. He knows the words, but we know the music. A flicker of hope ignited in Mina's chest. It was a terrifying, audacious plan. Go to trial with no hard evidence, armed with nothing but her own story. Meanwhile, Alex Chen, feeling a deep sense of responsibility for the turn of events, it was his reporting, after all, that had provoked Croft's aggressive counterattack, refused to stand by. He couldn't influence the court, but he could influence the court of public opinion. He put out a call to his followers, to every food lover in the city. He proposed a cash mob, a flash mob but with money, to support the Rolling Samosa on the Friday before the trial began. The response was overwhelming. That Friday, the street corner at 5th and Elm was impassable. Hundreds of people showed up, a massive cheerful crowd, all waving cash and chanting her name. News cameras arrived. It was a festival of support. As Mina and a hastily recruited team of friends worked frantically to serve the endless line, she looked out at the sea of faces, strangers, regulars, fellow vendors, and felt a powerful surge of strength. They believed her. They didn't need a video to see the truth. This was her armor. This was the fuel she needed. Standing in her saffron yellow truck, surrounded by her community, she found her resolve. She would not be silenced. She would walk into that courtroom and tell her story. She would honor her grandmother. Win or lose, Julian Croft would know he had been in a fight. The courtroom was a theater of quiet tension. On one side, Julian Croft and his phalanx of expensive lawyers, exuding an aura of inevitable victory. On the other, Mina, Ben, and a profound sense of righteous hope. Mina was the first to take the stand. When Ben began his questioning, he didn't ask her about the lawsuit or the theft. He asked her about her grandmother. Tell the jury about Nanny, he said simply. And Mina did. Her voice, nervous at first, grew steady and strong as she spoke. She didn't just recite a recipe, she painted a picture. She described the scent of cardamom and ginger that clung to her grandmother's sari. She talked about learning to grind spices with a mortar and pestle because her nanny insisted the heat of an electric grinder bruised the flavor. She explained the cultural significance of the three-cornered fold, representing past, present, and future. Her testimony was a living thing, imbued with love, grief, and an unshakable authenticity. The jury was captivated. This wasn't about a pastry, it was about a legacy. Then it was Croft's turn. He walked to the witness stand with the easy confidence of a man used to being adored. On direct examination by his own lawyer, he was charming and articulate, reiterating the fiction of his Himalayan inspiration. Then Ben stood up to cross-examine. He approached Croft with a calm, almost conversational demeanor. Chef Croft, he began, you're a master of flavor. Tell me in the Ember Puff why that specific ratio of cumin to coriander. Croft gave a practiced smile. It's about balance. The earthiness of the cumin plays against the bright citrus notes of the coriander. It was a good answer, a textbook answer. Ben nodded. And the adjoin, what role does that play? Croft hesitated for a fraction of a second. It provides a background note. A certain complexity, Ben pressed on. My client testified that her grandmother called it the secret fire, a spice that blooms late on the palate. Is that your experience? Croft's smile tightened. I wouldn't use that specific phrasing, no. Ben's questions kept coming, each one more specific, more steeped in the culture and history Mina had so beautifully articulated. Why must the dough be rolled paper-thin, chef? Why is it crucial to use ghee instead of butter? Tell us about the village where you were so inspired. What was its name? What were the people like? Under the relentless, detailed questioning, Croft's polished veneer began to crack. His answers grew vague, filled with empty culinary jargon. He could describe the taste, but he couldn't explain the soul. He knew the lines, but he had never read the book. The jury, who had been moved by Mina's heartfelt story, now watched Croft with growing skepticism. The charismatic celebrity was shrinking before their eyes, revealed as a hollow man who had memorized a script. The emperor had no clothes. Then Ben played his final card. The prosecution calls a rebuttal witness, he announced. We call Sarah Jensen. A woman walked nervously to the stand. Mina recognized her as one of the young chefs who had appeared in the background of Croft's TV show. She was his former sous chef. In a quiet but firm voice, Sarah testified that she had been present in the test kitchen for months leading up to Ember's opening. She told the jury about the weekly deliveries of samosas in a plain white bag. And then the fatal blow. What were Chef Croft's instructions regarding these samosas? Ben asked. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly at the jury. He put one on a plate and told us to reverse engineer this. Those were his exact words. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was a confession from the inside. The testimony, combined with Croft's own disastrous performance, was devastating. The truth, which had been locked out of the courtroom on a technicality, had just kicked down the door. The jury's deliberation was remarkably short. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were set, their decision clear. The foreman stood and, in a firm voice that echoed in the silent room, delivered the verdict. On the charge of misappropriation of trade secrets, they found in favor of the plaintiff, Maya Hassan. A wave of emotion washed over Mina so powerfully she nearly collapsed. She burst into tears, a flood of relief and vindication. Ben wrapped her in a fierce hug, his own eyes shining. Across the aisle, Julian Croft sat frozen, his face a pale mask of disbelief. His empire had just crumbled to dust. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Croft. The verdict was headline news. The story of his deception, corroborated by his former employee, was everywhere. His television network canceled his show. His publisher dropped his book deal. Reservations at Ember evaporated overnight, and within weeks, the restaurant closed its doors for good. The brand he had so meticulously built was now toxic, a synonym for fraud. For Mina, life transformed in the opposite direction. She was no longer a victim but a hero. A giant slayer. National morning shows, the very kind that had once provided Croft his platform, now clamored to interview her. She spoke with eloquence and grace, not just about her own struggle, but for the rights of all small artisans and the importance of honoring the origins of food. A few months later, the corner of 5th and Elm was almost unrecognizable. The Rolling Samosa was still there, a gleaming beacon of saffron yellow, but it was now the anchor of a small, permanent food truck pod. Zara, a proud smile now a permanent fixture on her face, managed a second truck, the Rolling Kebab, right next to her. Mina had used a portion of the settlement money to achieve a lifelong dream. Around the corner, a simple sign was being hung over a new glass door, Grandma S. It was her first brick-and-mortar restaurant. Small, cozy, and unpretentious, it was the antithesis of everything Ember had been. The final scene finds Mina in the warm, bustling kitchen of Grandma's on opening night. The air is thick with the glorious scent of spices. Alex, no longer just a blogger but her partner in every sense of the word, stands beside her, chopping onions with practiced speed. She looks out through the pass-through window at the dining room, filled with the happy chatter of her family, her friends, and a new generation of regulars. She catches her reflection in the polished steel of the counter. The woman looking back is different from the one who had first walked into Ben Carter's office. The flicker of doubt in her eyes has been replaced by the steady flame of confidence. She was no longer just the keeper of her grandmother's legacy, she was the builder of her own. She had taken on a giant, and not only one, but had discovered the true measure of her own strength in the process. This was her new normal, a perfect, delicious blend of honoring the past while creating a future entirely of her own making.